Welcome to EV-olution. My name is Andre Lawrence. This is my channel about electric cars from a different perspective, and this is the brand new 2023 Hyundai Ioniq 6. If you want to find out about all the details and see a side-by-side comparison with my Kia EV6 GT-Line Pack 2, stick around, I'll show you in 10 seconds. If you saw my last video, the 2023 Montreal EV show, where I quickly reviewed multiple EVs and had access to the Canadian prototype EV, the Project Arrow, and I'll have a link for that up here on the screen for you to check out, well, you'll know that Hyundai Canada gave me the privilege of having one of their press cars for 1 week. Now, I just picked this up yesterday, so let's go over some of the details. Because this is a press fleet vehicle, obviously Hyundai Canada's provided me with the top trim. That means that this is the preferred all-wheel drive ultimate package, meaning it comes with all of the options available. That's sunroof, heads-up display, larger wheels, heated ventilated seats, all the safety options, etc., etc. Now, one of the things that Hyundai Canada has done differently than they did with the Ioniq 5 and that Kia did with the EV6 is to limit themselves to only 3 trim levels and no small battery, so all of the 3 trim levels are long range. Speaking of that battery, the long range battery is exactly the same one that you'll find in the Ioniq 5. It's a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack, exactly like in the Kia EV6. Now, what are those trim levels going to set you back? Well, let me give you the prices in Canadian dollars. That long-range rear-wheel drive, which is called the preferred rear-wheel drive, will set you back 54,999 Canadian dollars. The preferred all-wheel drive will set you back $57,999. And you've got the preferred all-wheel drive with ultimate package that we've got here that has all of the goodies, and that'll set you back $63,999 Canadian dollars. That excludes the $19.25 Canadian dollars of shipping fees and any applicable taxes. Don't forget, in Canada, you obviously get the Canadian federal rebate, and then depending on the province you're in, you can get the provincial rebate as well, making the pricing a lot more attractive. So what are the power and range differences between these 3 different trims? Well, if you start with the preferred rear-wheel drive, which rides on 18-inch wheels, it has a single rear motor with 225 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. That'll give you an EPA-stated range of 581 kilometers. If you step up to the next version, which is the preferred all-wheel drive with 18-inch wheels, it'll give you a dual motor configuration of 320 horsepower and 446 pound-feet of torque, and that'll give you 509 kilometers of stated EPA range. Now, the ultimate package rides on 20-inch wheels as opposed to 18-inch. It's got some extra weight from the sunroof and some of the other gadgets that are in the car, and it has the same dual motor configuration of 320 horsepower, etc., but it'll only give you 435 kilometers of EPA stated range. That's a pretty massive hit. Now, the drag coefficient might have something to do with that. Drag coefficient of the base version, or the preferred rear-wheel drive version, and the all-wheel drive preferred is 0.22. Now, if you move up to these 20-inch wheels and in this ultimate package, you get 0.246. So there is a slight difference in that drag coefficient. In Canada, the Ioniq 6 comes in 6 different colors. You've got this matte color, which is called digital green. You've got abyss black. You've got nocturne gray, serenity white, transmission blue, and my favorite, ultimate red. The biggest difference between the Hyundai Ioniq 6 and its sibling, the Ioniq 5, are definitely the design. Now, the Ioniq 5 is a hatchback, whereas the Ioniq 6 is a traditional sedan. That means that there's going to be less space for storage, and that's with regards to this trunk. Being a traditional trunk, that means that the opening is far smaller, there is less storage space in terms of height because of this sloped teardrop shape, and you've got a decent depth, but you're limited with regards to this opening. And I'll have the measurements of the volume on the screen here for you to see, as well as the height and the width of the opening. Now, with that being said, these seats do fold down, and there are latches right here. You pull on that, but unlike the EV6, the seats don't fold flat on their own. So you have to reach around on the inside to put the seats down. Another thing that I found very peculiar is something with regards to those seats folding down. Let's go have a look at the side of the vehicle and I'll show you what I mean. But you can't put the rear seats down from the inside of the car. There's no latch on the top of the shoulder of the seat, and that's right over here. And there's also no latch on the bottom. The EV6 has a latch right here where you can lift and it'll drop the seat, but this car doesn't. It does have a little symbol for a trunk release on this little plastic thing, but I don't know, it's got nothing that I can do. And when you look on the other side, there's also no latch for the seat to go down. That means that a rear passenger, if they're on this side and want to split the 60-40 from inside on a trip to grab a bag, well, they can't do it. You got to pull over, pop the trunk, pull the latch, then fold it down. A little bit inconvenient. Did he just criticize a car the manufacturer just lent him a couple days ago? Yep, I did. Bear with me. I noticed a few little differences in the trunk of the Ioniq 6 as opposed to the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6. Now, one in particular, if you watched my video of the 2023 Montreal EV show, you'll know that in the Nissan area there's this little button right here on the top that's got a little lock symbol. Now that lock symbol allows you to press the button and lock all of the doors, something that I don't have in my vehicle. Now another little detail that's a little bit different is the bottom of this trunk. Now if you remove this false cover, you look underneath, the small storage space that's underneath there is, well, it's just that, it's kind of small. He criticized them again. Yeah, I did it again. And in here is the EVSE, or level 1 charging station. Something that I noticed was not included with the car is the V2L adapter, or the vehicle to load adapter. Now that's the little pistol that you stick into the charge port and you can use as a power supply to plug in 110 volt things like an espresso machine. If that's something you're interested in seeing how it works, I've got a video about that, all the details and a whole bunch of tests with the inside and outside plugs. I've got that up here on the screen for you to check out a little bit later. Now with that being said, a couple other details. The little floor cover that's in here, well, it's kind of thin. I know it's for lightness and stuff, but it's a little bit fiddly to put back in. So that's something that I wish was a little bit better. Another thing that I thought was a little strange, this is the tire mobility kit, and you can see what the problem is. That is the little carpet that goes in the trunk, and with these Velcros attached to it, if you pull on it, well, it kind of rips the carpet out. You can easily shove it back into place, and that's fine. But I wish they would have stuck it to the floor permanently or semi-permanently to not have to fiddle with that when you take out this tire mobility kit. Again? Another criticism? They're never going to lend him a car again. I know, but stick around. I've got more information later. Now, speaking of tire mobility kits, I don't suggest using the liquid that's anti-puncture liquid for your flat tire in any vehicle, especially in an electric car where there may be foam inserts inside your tires. That's because that liquid will get in there, screw up the foam, and essentially ruin a tire that could have been simply fixed with a plug. Now the rear legroom in the back of the Ioniq 6 is actually slightly longer than that of the Kia EV6. This has 996 millimeters, whereas the EV6 only has 990. Not a lot, 6 millimeters, but there are some differences elsewhere in the vehicle that we'll get to a little bit later, especially when I put the cars side by side. Now the rear legroom means that there is a ton of space back here and my legs are really well supported by the bolster of the bottom of the seat. That means that on a long trip I'll be very comfortable. One thing though is that my feet don't go underneath the front seat, even though I've got the seat positioned about halfway up. And that's okay because there's still a lot of room for my feet. Now, what about the caveat back here? Well, if you're a 6'2" or a 6'3" or whatever, around or above those numbers, you're going to find this low roof line a little bit tight. Now the Ioniq 6 has a roof line that has two measurements. In the rear you get 932 millimeters of height if you have a sunroof like in the Ultimate, and you get 937 millimeters when you're in the non-Ultimate version that doesn't have the sunroof. So if you're a taller person, the rear seat of this vehicle might feel a little bit cramped. There are a couple little details in the back of the Ioniq 6 that I thought were pretty interesting and different from the EV6. The EV6 has the rear vents on the B-pillars, which is actually a pretty interesting design because it allows for something that puts the ventilation directly on the person if it's wanted, as opposed to being far and down below in the center console, which is where the Ioniq 6 has them, and actually most cars put their rear vents on that center console. Another thing that they've done differently here is they put the USB ports on the back of that rear console as well, as opposed to the EV6 where they're on the back of the front seats. Now, something that's really cool in this car that my car doesn't have is that this seat belt, when the windows are open, can flap around in the EV6, but in the Ioniq, they've got a little spot where you can clip it in and that seat belt stays in place. That also gives you an advantage of when you put these rear seats down, your seat belt stays out of the way, and when you put them back up, seat belt doesn't get cramped and stuck behind the seat. Kind of cool. One detail that I wish that Hyundai and Kia would address is with regards to this armrest. Now the center armrest is actually quite comfortable. When you got it down, there's room for two elbows without bumping into each other. It's got two cup holders, which is quite nice, but they have a missed opportunity. There's no pass-through. It's just a piece of plastic. There's no opening. Now the Polestar 2 has an opening in that armrest that allows you to put skis, or in our case hockey sticks, that allow you to not have a roof rack in your car to carry anything that's long. Now, I wish Hyundai and Kia would address this in future versions because I think it's not something that costs a lot of money to do and adds a lot of convenience. To address the earlier points about me criticizing the Ioniq 6, yes, I criticize things that I think could be improved upon or things that I don't like personally, and that's subjective in my opinion. That doesn't make this a bad car. The Hyundai Ioniq 6 is actually a fantastic sedan and is a solid contender in the marketplace. Now, Hyundai positions this against the Tesla Model 3 and the Polestar 2, and I think that it's got a serious step up on those cars in certain aspects. Now, with that being said, I will be making a video about the things I hate about my EV6 because nothing is perfect. Now, the EV6 Things I Hate video will come out sometime in the future, and if you don't want to miss it, you might want to click on that subscribe button and check off the notification bell because I have absolutely no posting schedule whatsoever. Now, let's get back to the rest of the video where I show you the side-by-side comparison with my EV6 as well as what I liked about driving it. Sitting in the front of the Ioniq 6 is where the car really shines. Now, according to Hyundai, this car is targeted towards younger couples and millennials, and obviously you can't stick 3 kids, a dog, and a whole bunch of stuff in the back to go camping in this car, so that totally makes sense. Now, that means that the interior was designed a little bit more driver-centric than the Ioniq 5, which is quite an open space and designed to share everything with everybody in the car. One thing that I did find a little strange, though, is the fact that the instrument cluster, and these are both 12.3-inch screens, exactly like in the Ioniq 5 and in the Kia EV6. And the Ioniq 5s are flat, meaning that it's a little bit of a stretch to reach over to get to the extreme right side of that right touchscreen. Now, the EV6 has a curve towards the driver, making it way more driver-centric, and since this was supposed to be driver-centric as well, I was a little bit surprised to find that this bezel is flat, just like in the Ioniq 5. That means that reaching over to the right side to tap that touchscreen is a little bit of a stretch and I have to lean forward. In my EV6, I can pretty much just reach over and touch it. So a little bit of a strange choice, but it's just a little detail. It doesn't really take away from the functionality of the vehicle. Now, speaking of that touchscreen, the Ioniq 6 has the latest version of software. That means that you get the battery preconditioning, and that would be right here. Battery preconditioning mode means that when it's cold outside or it's winter outside and the battery is cold, if you're going to a DC fast charger, you can essentially set the DC fast charger destination in the navigation software of the Ioniq 6, and it'll start heating up the battery so that when you get to the destination and you plug in, the battery will be warmed up into optimal temperature or just thereabouts so that you get the fastest charging speed possible. Now, speaking of charging speeds, the Ioniq 6 is based on the same e-gmp 800-volt architecture, meaning that the car will charge from 10 to 80% in just 18 minutes. Now, that's something that's actually possible. With my EV6, I managed to do 10 to 81% in 19 minutes. So the claim speeds are definitely doable as long as you've got a 350 kilowatt charger. Another difference with the Ioniq 5 is the fact that the center console goes all the way to the front of the dash. Now, that means that you'll have a more closed-in feeling when you're driving. It's a little more driver-centric, but it also means that you get a ton of storage. There's a lot of space under here, and I'll have a measurement as to the length and width of that, as well as the height, up here on the screen for you to see. Also included is a 12-volt outlet, and it gives you 180 watts of power. Now, something else that is on here is the center controls, and this actually threw me the first few times I got into the car because I was looking for the door lock button. It's actually right in the middle. Also in the middle are the window controls. There are no window controls on either door. The front and rear window controls are right here. You've got the window lock button. This other button is the auto hold button, so that means the car will not creep forward when you let off the brake if this auto hold is on. And much like with the EV6 and Ioniq 5, when you turn the car off and then turn it back on, auto hold will remain persistent, which is something the Niro EV didn't do in the older version of the Niro EV, and I found it quite annoying, so thank goodness they did that. Also included here are 2 cup holders with little springy things. Yes, that's a technical term. And you've got the wireless charging pad right here as well. Now, that wireless charging pad has a USB-A port right beside it. That USB-A port is for Android Auto and Apple Carplay. And once again, just like in the Ioniq 5 and EV6, nope, it's not wireless. So you can get a Kia Rio for 20,000 Canadian and it'll have wireless Android Auto and CarPlay, but your $65,000 Ioniq 6 that just came out in the market, nope. So, oh well. You'll have to get a wireless adapter, and those are available. There are a bunch of reviews of different models that are available. Something that was done really well in the Ioniq 6 is the interior layout of this car. Now, much like with the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6, there's a great mix of actual hardware buttons and software in the touchscreen. So they've got most of the controls that you're going to use on a daily basis in buttons that you're actually going to be able to touch and use, and then anything else that's a little more fiddly, it's going to be stuck somewhere in a menu on the touchscreen, and that's fine. One thing I did find a little bit odd is that the heated seats and heated steering wheel, there's no physical button. Now, I went over the center console and I looked on the dash, and there is no button for the heated seats. I would have thought they would have put them on the screen here somewhere, because that kind of makes sense to put it with climate control, but nope. So when you want to turn on the heated seats, or if you've got the heated seats on, you're listening to the radio and it's starting to get kind of hot, you got to dig through the menu to get to that. It's not very complicated. You just tap on the home screen, tap on warmer ventilation, and then tap on off. But that's 3 taps and you're looking at a touchscreen instead of just hitting a button that's physical like in my Kia EV6. That was a bit of an odd choice in a place like a northern climate like here in the province of Quebec. It's a bit of an annoyance. Now, with that being said, the interior design and layout is quite nice. If you look at the steering wheel, everything is nicely laid out. You've got the drive mode button down here. You've got the same controls as on the EV6, where you've got the cruise control on the left and the radio controls, media controls, and phone controls on the right. And when I went from my e-niro to the EV6, I was confused for the first month. I kept pressing the radio button instead of the cruise button. But that got me thinking, most people in the world are right-handed. Why would you put cruise control, something that you touch only occasionally, on the right-hand side of the steering wheel, as opposed to having it on the left, and putting the things that you touch most often, like the media control and the phone, on the right? So I think switching this around in the Ioniq 6, the Ioniq 5, and the EV6 was a great design choice. One thing you might notice that's different with the EV6 is that in the center console, you don't have a little shifter knob. You actually have a shifter on the lever that's right below the wiper arm. Now, this little shifter lever is something that works by twisting up for drive, pulling down for reverse, pressing P for park. Now, something this car does that the EV6 didn't do before I got the software update is when the car is in drive, the emergency parking brake will turn off, and when you press the park button, the car will shift to park, and it'll also activate the emergency parking brake. Now, the EV6 didn't do that. The latest software update actually added that as a feature, which I think is a great idea. The overhead console of the Ioniq 6 will be very familiar to anybody who's been in an Ioniq 5. Although the layout is a little bit different, it is pretty much the same thing, as well as in the EV6. Now, you've got the button to turn on all of the lights in the car. That's the map lights, this light here, and one for the rear passengers. You've got this button that when it's pressed, all the lights turn on when the doors are open. And then you've got this button here, which turns on just the front light, that's LED. And then you've got the map lights, which are touch sensitive. There's a little nub here that you can feel, so you don't have to go looking for it. And you've got the SOS for emergencies. You've got the little tow truck symbol, that's for roadside assistance. And then you've got the roof control. Now, this works in the same way as the EV6, and I've got a video that I explain on how this works. I'll put a link to that up here on the screen for you to see. I don't know if you remember when the Ioniq 5 came out and the press release showed that the Ioniq 5 glove box was a drawer. Well, that didn't come to North America, unfortunately. And the Ioniq 6 also does not have a drawer for a glove box. So if you're wondering about that, it's a regular glove box with a decent amount of room. So there you go. A couple of other details that are great in the Ioniq 6. One of them is the sound system. Now, this uses a Bose sound system, and the sound in this car is actually really, really good. The EV6 has a Meridian system, and the Meridian system is really good. It's got 14 speakers, including the subwoofer, but I find that the subwoofer does almost nothing in the equation of sound. Now, in this car with the Bose system, it reminds me of my e-niro EV that had a Harman Kardon. When you turn it on and you've got some bass, you can feel that subwoofer doing the job. The other feature that I think is quite nice is they've included 3 home link buttons for your garage door opener. You can open, close, and whatever you want to do with the third button. The EV6 doesn't have those buttons on the mirror, and it was a bit of a surprise because the e-niro EV had all of the buttons. Speaking of the rear view mirror, something that people might not mention in other videos is that this is an auto dimming mirror. That means that when you're driving at night and those headlights come up behind you, whether they're high or low beam, the mirror will dim to make it so that you're not blinded. Another thing the Ioniq 6 does differently than the Kia EV6 is the heads-up display. Now the heads-up display has something that's pretty cool. When you approach a stop sign, the stop sign will actually appear in the heads-up display. Now my EV6 will only show me the speed signs and the school zone signs, but it won't show me stop or yield signs, and I thought that was pretty cool that the Ioniq 6 does that. Now there are other differences, including the layout and the cruise control feature, but that would be another video entirely. Another nice feature about the Ioniq 6 on the inside, you don't have piano black finish. Thank you, Hyundai, for not doing like Kia that seems to like painting piano black on everything that's interior of their vehicles. It's a terrible idea because when the sun shines on it, you get blinded, and after a short amount of time, it gets fingerprints and dust and kind of looks crappy. So, well done, good design choice. One thing that I discovered in the last couple of days, though, is even though there's no piano black in here, and it's some really nice matte gray finish pretty much all over the place, it's got this silver trim around the bezel of the touchscreens, and although it looks great, when you're driving and it's sunny, there's a reflection that happens up here on the screen, and it's not terrible, but it's a little bit distracting, and I thought that was something that should be changed. While we're on the subject of reflections, when I was driving home the other day, I noticed that there was a massive reflection from the speaker grill cover that's on the rear deck. Basically, the plastic cover is not shiny, but it's not completely matte, and it made a massive reflection in the rear window. Because the Ioniq 6 is a sedan and not a crossover utility vehicle like the Ioniq 5, it means that the car is going to be lower and have a little bit less headroom. Now what does that actually translate to? Well, the Ioniq 5 has 1,046 millimeters of headroom, whereas this vehicle without a sunroof has 1,022. If you add the sunroof like in this vehicle, you're going to get 974 millimeters, and I'll try and put all that stuff here on the screen in inches for you. But you can still fit into this car if you do two things. One, if you are 6 foot something and you drop the seat all the way down like I have here, I have a decent amount of headroom, and it all depends on how you are 6 feet something. Are you 6 feet something because you got super long legs? You're going to fit in this car quite comfortably. If you're 6 foot something because you're all body, then it's going to be much like in the EV6, you might find the roof a little bit low. So it depends on how you're made, and I suggest that you take the car for a test drive or at least sit in one to get a feel for what you think with regards to sunroof or not. Now, speaking of legs, what about the legroom? Well, the legroom in the Ioniq 6 is very generous. This car being more focused on driver and front passenger as opposed to family means that you get 1,075 millimeters of legroom. I've got the seat not all the way back and I can't touch the firewall, so whatever that's worth, I'm only 5 feet 8, but there you go. Now the Ioniq 5, on the other hand, has 1,060 millimeters, so that means that your rear passengers get a little bit more room. The EV6, almost equivalent, actually a little bit more at 1,078 millimeters. Another feature that I haven't touched on and shows that the Ioniq 6 is targeted to a younger audience is the fact the ambient lighting is quite insane. Now my EV6 has ambient lighting in the door cards and the bottom and around the console and a few other places, and it's pretty cool and you can do all sorts of things with it, changing the color. But the Ioniq 6 takes things to a whole new level. Now I'll put some B-roll up here on the screen for you to see, but at night, this thing lights up like crazy. Not only is the bottom portion of the door card lit up, but you've got the top portion where the handle is that goes completely across the door. And you can do all sorts of things like link it to drive mode, you can have it dimmed in the dark, you can change the colors, you can sync the lighting with speed, you can even link it to voice recognition. That links the mood lighting to the audio system's voice recognition, providing visual feedback. I don't know what that does, I haven't tested it yet, but there you go. If you're into crazy ambient lighting, the Ioniq 6 has you well served. When I first saw the exterior of the Hyundai Ioniq 6, something that caught my eye were these 20-inch wheels. Now, it wasn't the wheels, it was more specifically the tires. Now, on my Kia EV6, I also have 20-inch wheels, but the tires are Continental Cross Contact RX in 255/45 R20. Now on these wheels, we have some Pirelli P0s, and they are marked Elect, so I'm guessing they're designed specifically for electric cars. But what really caught me was the 245/40/20. So these tires are a little bit more low profile. They aren't as wide as in my car. What that gives you though is some excellent handling. The car does feel very light when you throw it around in a curve, but it does offer a harsher ride than in the EV6 because the tires on my car are a little bit thicker. The Ioniq 6 differs from the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6 in another way, and that's what's under the hood. Now if we pop this open, you'll notice that the frunk is actually different than what we've got in the other two cars. Now, instead of having a clamshell that closes on top, this one actually seals to the hood with this rubber seal that goes all the way around. That's because this part of the hood is actually a little bit lower than the rest of it. That means that when you're driving in snow, rain, and dirt, it shouldn't get dirty under there. Now, it is a small volume, but you can keep the level 1 charger and a few other things under there, so it could still be of some decent use. You might be wondering why I've got this camera stick up so close to me, and that's because I found something very cool that Hyundai has done that Kia hasn't. And I wish Kia would take care of this because it's really cool. Now, I own a smartwatch, and it's a Samsung Galaxy Watch 5. No, I'm not sponsored, it's just the watch that I wear. Now, you've got the My BlueLink app on your cell phone, but wouldn't it be cool if you could do all of the same things straight on your smartwatch? Well, guess what? They've got the My BlueLink app for your smartwatch. Now, hopefully you can see this in the sun, but all you have to do is swipe up once the app is installed. If you can see the Hyundai BlueLink app, just tap on that. Now, the first time that you do this, it'll load up a little bit slower. It'll spin for a little while it connects to the surfaces. But you've got the Hyundai Ioniq 6, you've got vehicle status, charge start, climate control, door lock, door unlock, charge stop. Basically, almost everything that you can do in the BlueLink app on your cell phone. I just thought that was pretty cool, and I wish Kia would do something like that because, well, I own a Kia EV6. Although my videos usually don't include a whole bunch of technical specs and details, I had some viewers ask me about specific things, so I thought I would include them earlier on in this video and get down to details afterwards. Now, with that being said, comparing a sedan to a hatchback might not be the perfect comparison, but having numbers without actually seeing a side-by-side with another vehicle kind of doesn't mean much. So I'm putting the Ioniq 6 beside my Kia EV6, and we're going to show you what some of those differences are. Now, we talked about wheelbase being 2.95 meters versus 2.9 meters, so let's have a look at what that actually means in the real world. Let me step back over here and show you on this other camera what that actually means. Now, I've lined up the vehicles so that we've got the A pillars and B pillars pretty much lined up at the right place, and that means that the rear hubs are pretty much dead center. So if I take this camera and give you a brief overview, you can see the hub of the EV6 lines up with the hub of the Ioniq 6. Now, if we walk this forward and I take you over here, you'll notice that the front wheels look like they're dead on, but if I go here and I come straight across, I've got a few extra centimeters. Well, that's that 5 centimeter difference with regards to the wheelbase that we were talking about, and that's what translates into the different room inside the vehicle for the passengers. Another difference is the overhangs. Now, the front of the vehicles look like they're lined up, but let's have a look on this camera what that actually works out to be. Now, it may be really hard to tell, but the Ioniq 6 definitely has a nose that protrudes further out than the EV6, and that would explain why the Ioniq 6 is longer in terms of overall length. So let's get down over here and then go slightly up, and you'll see the EV6 is a little bit shorter. And if we come over to the other side, you can see that the Ioniq 6's nose protrudes ever so slightly from the EV6. Now let's head over to the back and see what happens with the overhangs in the back. I'm guessing they're pretty close, but let's go see. Now, once again, it might be hard to tell on this camera and from this angle, but trust me, the rear of the Ioniq 6 protrudes out actually quite a bit. And that explains the overall length of the Ioniq 6 being longer than the EV6. The overhangs in the front to the back are actually shorter on my Kia EV6. Now, what about comparing the difference in width? That's something that's a little bit harder to do, so I figured out this way that's not scientific, but close enough as I can get in terms of what I can show you. So essentially what I've done is I've got this tape measure lined up from the front wheel of the Ioniq 6 to the back wheel of the EV6. I've lined them up as much as possible. They are as close as you can get to being dead on without having a line painted on my driveway, which I'm not going to do. What I've done is I've got my GoPro down here showing you that these are lined up pretty much dead on. So what does that mean about the width on the other side? Well, let's go have a look. Now, this measurement is by no means scientific and is to be taken with a huge grain of salt because I've got nothing to line these up and I did this positioning all by myself, so it is what it is. Well, what I've done is I've taken my tape measure and I've run it from the front wheel to my back wheel to make sure that that's pretty much lined up, and I've run it all the way to the front wheel of the Ioniq 6. Now, what this shows you is the difference in millimeters between the two cars. Now, the Ioniq is 1,880 millimeters wide, and the EV6 is 1,890. So it is slightly larger, and that can be seen on this little GoPro right down here. Showing the difference in height between these two vehicles is a lot easier than showing the difference in width. I've got them lined up on some flat ground, and I've got a camera over there, and I'll give you a view of what that is right now. you can see that the Ioniq 6 is a little bit lower as a sedan than the EV6. Now the measurements for that are 1495 millimeters for the Ioniq 6, and you've got the EV6 at 1545. So that difference isn't that large, which is a little bit of a surprise to me, but the Ioniq 6 is at 1605 millimeters. That really makes the Ioniq 6 a crossover utility vehicle. The EV6, I consider it to be a giant hatchback or a hot hatch. That's really, really big. And the Ioniq 6 fits into the sedan category perfectly with its measurement of 1495. One thing I forgot to mention, if you look at the two vehicles side by side, you'll notice not only the roof line of the EV6 is higher, but you've also got the windowsill and mirrors that are higher. This shows that the vehicle rides a little bit higher up, and actually when you're sitting in the car, the seating position in the EV6 is definitely higher up than in the Ioniq 6, which is more of a lower to the ground seat position. If you've made it this far into the video, then first of all, congratulations, because my videos are long. And second of all, you're probably wondering, Andre, how does this car drive? Well, if you're looking out the front window right now, there's a 35 km/h curve, and I'm going more than that. As you can see, these tires do a great job of sticking to the road, and even at this speed that's, let's say, faster than it could be, it's excellent. Let's do that again. This is definitely a little more grippy than in my EV6. The road feel is good. The steering goes in very nicely. You can feel where the grip is in this car. It's really, really nice. Wow, that's awesome and way too fast for that curve. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Let's do that again. Here's another one. That was fun. But what I've noticed now that I've driven this car for about a week is that the road communicates a little bit more into the cabin. So it is something that translates the bumps a little bit more into the car, most likely probably due to those very low profile tires as compared to mine. But what it does do is give you excellent handling. Now the EV6 is a bit of a compromise between sport and comfort. Because the tires I have are not as low profile as in this car offers better handling. It'll take curves at faster speeds, as you might have noticed. That doesn't mean that the EV6 doesn't handle. It does very well, but I can definitely feel a bit more of a float when I get into a curve more aggressively as compared to the Ioniq 6. Now when I say that this car communicates the road into the car, it's not like the Tesla Model 3 or the Model Y or the Polestar 2, where those vehicles I find offer a little bit of a harsher ride, Polestar 2 in particular. This car gives you a decent compromise. It's not as squishy as I would like. I tend to prefer a car that offers more comfort than sport, but anybody who likes driving something that's a little bit more sporty is going to love the Ioniq 6. The second difference that I was talking about has to do with the programming of the accelerator pedal in the Ioniq 6 as compared to the EV6. Now this is something that's rather nuanced, and it's not something that everybody may notice, but coming out of an EV6 as a daily driver, what I notice in this car is even in sport mode, and that's where I noticed it the most, because in my car, when I hit the accelerator pedal and I floor it, essentially all of the power is in that first millimeter, and it's instant power. This is also instantaneous, but there's a slight ramp at the beginning. When you floor it, it'll go and then give you all the power, so it's less of a violent kick in the pants. That's not a bad thing. That actually makes it a little bit more pleasant to drive when you've got passengers, because throwing your passengers' heads into their seats when you're accelerating might be funny as a driver, but not so fun as a passenger. Ask my wife. Another nice thing about the quality of construction for the Ioniq 6 has to do with the fact that the cabin is very quiet. Now, even though I've got the glass exposed, the inside of the cabin is very quiet, even on the highway at highway speeds. That's something that I really noticed in my EV6, and it's nice to see that the Ioniq 5 carries that over, where the insulation is fantastic. The build quality in this car is fantastic as well. The sedan market in North America may be waning, but that's probably partly due to the fact that there aren't a ton of exciting sedans. Now the Ioniq 6's looks may be polarizing. I'm one of the people that thinks it looks good, and people were snapping pictures and giving me thumbs up while I was driving it, so I'm guessing it hits the mark for some people. Now the Ioniq 6's competition is supposed to be the Tesla Model 3 and the Polestar 2, but I would rather say the competition for the Ioniq 6 is any gas-powered sedan, because we want more people driving electric. Our planet needs help. With that being said, the Polestar 2 being the competition for the Ioniq 6 is partially correct. Now the Polestar 2 is a hatchback and it's a 4-seater. This is a real sedan and seats 5. So yes, they compare, but it's not exactly the same segment. Now with regards to Tesla, the Tesla Model 3 is similarly sized. It's got a similar amount of space, but there are a couple things to consider. Now Tesla Model 3 will sit you a little bit lower, and the ride is a little bit harder than in the Ioniq 6. And then there are a couple points to think about, and one of them is service centers. Now yes, you've got the Tesla technicians that will go to your place when you need something, but if you need to go to a Tesla service center for any reason, some places don't really have one that's close, so that may be something to consider depending on where you live. Now with regards to the second point about Tesla Model 3, let's call a duck. If it quacks, it's a duck. Tesla's build quality in North America is less than on par, let's just say, than other manufacturers. So that might be something to consider as well. When you're buying the Hyundai Ioniq 6, build quality is not an issue. They've been building cars for a long time, and yes, a long time ago they were not so good, let's just say. But in the last several years, they've proven to be some of the top builders in the world. And the Ioniq 6, no exception. So what do I think of it? In general, it's a great looking car, my opinion. Some people don't like it. It rides well, it drives well, it's sporty, it's got a lot of room, smaller trunk, maybe a little bit less room in the back for a 6-footer, but if that's not a consideration for you, the Ioniq 6 is definitely a car to look into. Did you know that I've got some t-shirts and some hoodies on my website and my online store? I'll have a link to that in the description below, so it might be something you want to check out. You can be part of the evolution without owning an electric car by having one of my t-shirts. If you like this video, please consider clicking on that thumbs up button, because it tells the YouTube algorithm that this video is worth sharing. More people get to see it and learn about the Ioniq 6 and maybe some other vehicles that I will be testing in the future, or some of the videos that I've made in the past. Now, if you really like this video, then please click on that subscribe button and check that notification bell. The subscribe button tells me that you like what I make and makes me want to make more content, because let's face it, this is a ton of work. And if you check the notification bell, well, you get a notification when I post a video, because I have zero posting schedule. Don't rely on me for that. I don't post every week, every 2 weeks. It happens when it happens because, well, life. So with that being said, thank you for taking the time to watch my video, and don't forget, bloopers at the end. Welcome to evolution. Wow, that was a little enthusiastic. It is the ultimate package. If you want to find all about it, find all about it. Yeah, you can find all about it if you want. If you saw my last video, the 2023 Montreal EV show, where I quickly heads-up display, heated and ventilated seats, and nice. Long-range rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive in terms of power and range. Oh, excuse me. It'll give you 581 kilometers of EPA-rated range. Being a Kia vehicle, or Kia. I live in Kia cars, and that's what happens. Crap. It comes on 18-inch rims, and it'll give you 851 kilometers. Yeah, a little dyslexia there, Andre. Oh, shit. So what are the power and range levels? Well, 581 kilometers, 18-inch wheels, 581 kilometers. Preferred wheel drive, power, wheels, range. Do that. Trunk instead of a hatchback. It's just something that I wish that Hyundai This being a sedan, whereas the Ioniq 5 is that's a lot of words for nothing. Now the Ioniq 5 is a traditional hatchback with a lot of storage and space, where something in my mouth. Is it a bug? Well, it's gone now. Go fly somewhere else. Sibling the Ioniq 5 are definitely the design. The design. That's like a recurring blooper in all of my bloopers. That's a blooper of a blooper. Now, the inside of the driver's passenger. The inside of the driver's passenger is probably full of blood and guts. Jesus. Now you've got the SOS for emergencies, and you've got the towing for roadside assistance. And this button, it's the front dome button only. Now this isn't high to put a 12 liter bottle. Yeah. Now you can also link these things to multiple things. Hello?
Hello, Papa.
Yes, you're in my video. I'm recording video and now I've had to stop.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're sorry? Well, you know this is going into the bloopers, eh?
Yes, I know.
Okay. Qu'est-ce que je peux faire pour toi? All right. I can edit that into something nice. That was terrible. They weren't recording? Oh,